the government for the warm reception that we've had here, and also to congratulate them for 30 years of celebrating the free trade zone, and also for taking such good care of us since we're here. We've been enjoying the pepper soup, the jollof rice, and the moi moi, all the really excellent food that Nigeria has to offer. The last week in Niamey, the African Union had the Industrialization Summit, and the heads of state did confirm the importance of the special economic free zones as strategic engines for transforming African economies and contributing to economic and socioeconomic development and inclusive development. I think that is important. The minister this morning did mention that it wasn't a question if the special economic zones were important, that they are important and they are here to stay. But the question is, how do we valorize them and make them to become that engine of growth, that tool that can effectively contribute to the transformation of African economies? The question you're asking, I think, is of strategic importance because we have not done quite well in making the relationship between research and commercialization of research in most of our countries. And the special economic zones could play a significant role in contributing towards this. I think earlier in the day, one of the speakers did mention that we have about 237 of special economic zones across the continent. They call different names in other countries, but only about 51 of them are effectively functioning. So the question is why? Why and how? What do we need to do to make these areas become that engines of growth that we all hope for? I think, building on what the colleague just said, it's important that there is a clear vision and strategy to encourage that linkage between research and commercialization, because it's not that clear in most what we have done at AUD and NEPAD to look at various policies, that clarity and then the mechanisms to ensure that there is that relationship between research and commercialization is effective, is not there. So, for one, we need that clear vision of the government, and this must be linked to the national development plans of the countries. We do not believe that you want these zones to operate as isolated units, but they must be an integral part of the broader development vision of the countries in which they are operating. And we also think for that then to happen, you do need the innovation ecosystem to be functional. The different things that you projected in the slides have to be in place for us to take full advantage of these areas, including, of course, in the infrastructure, including legislation, including other services that can support growth. For instance, if you have startups in this free economic zone, do we have, for instance, services that can help them understand issues of intellectual property rights? So having all those services that provides an ecosystem for operational purposes will be critical. We also do believe that, of course, resources are important. The financing, different financial windows. My colleague just spoke about from the climate perspective. There is significant resources that are out there. for which many African businesses are not aware of or do not know how they can take advantage of these global climate financing windows that are out there. That's one. Two, just the capacity to design feasible programs that can have access to such funding is another critical point that needs to be done. But thirdly, we do think for these zones to be successful, they also have to be located where they are resources that they need. So are there skilled labor around? What asset is there that is driving that economic zone? Are factors that must be considered when we reflect on establishing them to give a 50% chance of them succeeding. So I think the point I'm making is planning is critical. Planning within the broader context of the developmental priorities of the continent, of the country, is critical. Planning that takes into account an inclusive approach to address the inequalities that we saw exacerbated and exposed during the pandemic. And planning that ensures that the stakeholders participate, including, of course, women and youth, and given the possibilities for them to engage in this zone for effective. At the end of the day, we want this free special economic zone to contribute to job creation, to contribute to sustainable economic growth, and to ensure that the overall transformation envisaged by the government is assured. At the African Union Development Agency, we have a few programs that we are undertaking to help build capacity for planning, but also just to give government policymakers opportunity to learn from other places on what they are doing in terms of putting in place an ecosystem to support spatial economic zones. So for instance, through one of our programs called ASCI, we do take government officials to Sweden, the Lund University, that have a really good ecosystem for transforming research into commercial products. So we take them for a yearly visit where they can see what is happening and go back to their countries and see what lessons they've learned there, but also what lessons they share with this, other countries. We also have developed a tool that will help member states to do their own self-assessment of their ecosystem. So not, specialized organizations like us coming in all the time, and no, give them the tool to do their assessment and see where the weak link in establishing these innovation ecosystems are, and then how we can help to them and work with them to strengthen such ecosystems. We also have another tool that we're using with member states to strengthen more the planning process at sub-national level that can help to find out the appropriate areas where such spatial economic zones can be established. So working with member states, providing them with tools that can help them to make such assessment is important. Providing capacity building support to look at where reforms have to be established, particularly in the physical space, is critical. This morning, I think it was Richard that talked about the new tax laws. We have a program that we work with member states to support them in just understanding complex contract negotiations. From what he was saying this morning, it sounded absolutely complex to me, this new tax regime. So obviously, the member states needs to be accompanied whatever way we can so that they can, appreciate these new complex regimes that are out there and see how they can be useful to member states. And at the end of the day, coming back to your questions, these special economic zones should be used for beneficiation processes to ensure that jobs are created for our young people to get employment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Valuable insights. May we move on?
Yeah. extending on existing courtesies. It's a pleasure to be here with the panelists, and I would just like to go straight into my own views. We know certain facts for sure about energy transition. We need to move to cleaner fuel generation, and we must move away from conventional fuel sources. But how do we do this in a sustainable way is a big question within Africa. Another fact is, yes, we need to move to cleaner sources of energy, but then there's energy poverty. So when addressing the energy transition, we have to find a fair balance between moving to cleaner energy and looking at how do we have access and energy security in Africa that will deliver on our economic growth. If we're looking at energy transition from a sustainability perspective alone, we will not achieve any economic growth. So we need to be very pragmatic and fair to ourselves, to ask ourselves, what exactly do we need? I really like the topic on research and commercializing research. Because why do we do research in the first place? We want to find solutions to problems that exist, or when we do not have any problems, we look at the status quo and ask ourselves, how can we make this better? How can we live cleaner? How can we generate economic growth in a greener, more sustainable manner? And as discussed earlier during the panel, I remember the boss for the Ghana SEZ saying that we have to be very pragmatic, and we have to, I think I wrote what he had said. He said we have to avoid models that are not viable. This is very apt because we must design what we need based on what we require in the future, but also it has to be based on research that is rich in data and well-informed. So that brings me to the issue of transitioning from just research, or the importance of research in economic growth and in the energy transition. When we look at it from an SEZ perspective that is predominantly focused on manufacturing, what can research help us to achieve? If we look at the resource efficiency within our industries, we have the technical resources, we have the non-technical resources. Looking at non-technical resources, we start to look at stakeholders, communities, and with research, and concerted data gathering efforts, we can begin to reduce uncertainties, which helps to amplify chances for attracting investments that will deliver on our economic growth. When we look at it from the technical perspective, we have existing SEZs, we have industrial parks, but how do they operate? Looking at it from a resource efficiency perspective, is it a net zero gain? Probably not, because sometimes you find industries that are supposed to be going green, but then they're generating or utilizing so much fossil fuel, and it's not an issue to utilize such amount of fossil fuel. But right now, where we have alternatives and we can have hybrid measures of energy generation, looking at it from an energy consumption perspective, as well as energy efficiency perspective, then we can do things better. So we begin to address these issues. When we look at the vulnerabilities that COVID exposed, just from a mere mention of the pharma sector, Africa does not have any big pharma. So that vulnerability was exposed. And we had to rely on India and other foreign countries to import active pharmaceutical ingredients, right? Even for basic medication like paracetamol. And these are now facts that we know. How do we then dig into, back into data gathering, getting the information that exists, looking at what exactly are projections for national development in the future, what are the needs within Africa, how can we be self-sufficient, and using the results of researches like this, begin to model, design, and develop economic zones as well as industrial park and economic opportunities that will actually give us a progressive development. So looking at also resources, we know that research comes to play a very big role when it comes to trade flows. Why do we want economic zones in the first place? Because we need to boost trade, but trade has to be facilitated. How can trade be facilitated? You need to know exactly what kind of market access you have, what you are currently manufacturing, where is it needed, where is the demand, what are your supply chain dynamics. Research really, really comes to play here. We have seen that special economic zones need to evolve and begin to embrace more of startups and SMEs. But then, I think we have a large issue when it comes to SMEs and startups. With the SME ideas and startups and at the incubation level, it almost seems that that is the whole research that we do. And that is why a lot of times within the innovation ecosystem, we have a lot of flash in the pan activities where you have SMEs come up with ideas and solutions, they go to market, but because we do not have a continuous iteration of research, improving on the solutions that they have come up with, after a while, it's not sustainable and then it dies. And I think, this brings to bear the importance of including academia and commercializing our research, our innovations within Africa, as part of the strategy for development for intra-Africa integration and working with ourselves, either, multilaterally amongst the member states or bilaterally and amongst the institutions. Lastly, I would like to talk about when they say that we need tailor-made, referencing also the previous panel, tailor-made, smart, and cost-effective SEZs, or economic development plans. When we talk about smart, what does that really mean? It means that it has to be tech-enabled, but it doesn't just stop there. When we talk about smart, it shouldn't refer only to digitalization or to getting, like remote collaborative working tools and all that. It has to be research informed. So true smartness or absolute smartness would come from a research informed, tech enabled solution for our economies. And we know what we already know, but what we don't know we can find out through research. I would leverage on what one of the panelists said, the second panelist. I do really apologize for not mentioning your name, but we do research to understand more. And there are a lot of things that happen within Africa that are not happenstances. We see how the EU has evolved, and with AFCFTA, there are lots of learnings from it. We don't have to copy verbatim what is going on in Europe. We have an opportunity to adapt. How do we adapt? For example, I was discussing about Africa being the mecca for carbon credits because a lot of the companies in the developed countries are seeking carbon credits. But then what happens with projects in Africa? We go back again to the Dutch disease of exporting crude oil and importing processed petroleum commodities. The same way, we have a carbon credit opportunity to market and to compete on the carbon credit, trade market, but it is only on voluntary basis. A lot of the projects within Africa are not on, the CERs are not traded on the mandatory markets, they are traded on the voluntary market. How do we build capacity? Through research, utilizing academia. How do we build capacity to ensure that we begin to verify and validate the credits that we have within ourselves? Just yesterday I was reading or watching a video, the Vice President of Ghana, His Excellency Baumia, was saying that they will begin to buy petroleum products with gold. Now that alone should catalyze academic research to begin to look at the viability of even the concept of buying crude with goals, because at the onset you would even have to ask yourself, this should be a short-term thing. Through research, you can decide what duration this is going to go on for, because you're exchanging value for value that you can create, right? And this is just, another point to buttress the importance of research and the fact that we're sitting on a gold mine of research that can be commercialized and will deliver economic growth, not only for the individual states, but regional integration, global integration in terms of value chains, and the progress of Africa at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well said. I'm told we're a bit behind on time, so can we move on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for having me here. Let me provide a bit of context and a bit of additional perspective. I'm with GIZ. I'm a coordinator for the Sustainable Economic Development Cluster of GIZ programs here in Nigeria, supporting the Nigerian federal government, but also a number of states in sustainable economic development. So economic zones are not in the core of our work, but are part of our work. We look in a very holistic way in skills development, but also on supporting the private sector, in particular micro, small and medium enterprises, as job creation is in our focus. We look on policy, business enabling environment, the rules and regulation, ease of doing business in total, but also value chains. And we work with investment promotion agencies in the States, which sometimes is quite overlapping with economic zones, access to markets, and also on startups and business skills development. So we have, I would say, taking the reference to one of your points, we have this ecosystem we are supporting in private sector development and systemic economic development, and also like very much your graph on the innovation ecosystem. However, I would like to open that a bit, and I think that's mainly my point, that we have to look at linkages. So the linkages from the economic zones, the forward and backward linkages, but also the vertical linkages to the outside world of the economic zones, to in particular micro, small and medium enterprises, and also the exchange with the businesses, but also the individuals and research institutions. So the stuff, the competition of businesses in the economic zones, and the opportunity particular zones provide for direct investment. I'm not only talking about foreign direct investment, in particular in the Nigerian context. This is quite going down for a while, but we have a lot of domestic investment, and we have in particular a good potential for remittances, which might be attracted when those who went abroad, and as you all know, a lot of Nigerian knowledge went abroad in the last years and is eager to invest back home or even to come back. And this kind of linkages between universities abroad, where people have migrated to, and their projects they are likely to support back in Nigeria. And I think this linkages and opportunities we're looking at, in particular also towards the micro, small, and medium enterprises. This is what I would like to stress here. We have talked about your research results. I think that was quite impressive. Yes, of course, you need a particular environment for the economic zones, as well, of course, for the other businesses, the stable infrastructure, transport, electricity, security. That's certainly an aspect. And here, I think economic zones also play a bit of a role model for the environment and the other businesses around. So that's what we also want to have. We also want to have this kind of stable environment. We want to have this one-stop shop. We want to have support from the government. We want to have support in even areas where, like security, it is important to attract skilled labor to a particular place. Sometimes people are not willing to move out of their comfort zone into other areas, and that's quite an important part to attract businesses to around the economic zones, not even only into economic zones. We also have to look at success stories. I mean, yes, as I said, economic zones are a lab. We can test and try a lot of things, and I would also like to see economic zones to be a bit more experimental here. I think in particular when it comes to energy, but also architecture and things like that. You can do a lot in economic zones, which then could later trickle down into other areas. But I think we also have to look at the potential for zones to create research and business cases which might be not planned by state governments. And we have a lot of economic zones which are very carefully planned, but not really meet the market demands. On the other side, we have success stories, in particular in Nigeria, creative sector, entertainment industry, film, but also in Lagos, the whole ICT sector, even e-commerce, everything was growing without the support of economic zones. They only jumped on that wagon a bit later. So we can learn from the success stories and copy what has worked instead of creating zones which are sometimes very heavily dependent on oil and gas, steel, and the bigger projects. Having said that, I think a lot of things were already said, and with regard to time, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you to come and give your testimony?
Okay. Thank you so much. I take this opportunity to thank African Economic Zone Organization for organizing this very important platform to interact and discuss successes and also challenges that special economic zone are facing. Maybe to give you some experiences from Ethiopia in developing industrial parks. Currently, Ethiopia reached about 23 industrial parks. We have a very limited experiences in industrial park development, maybe less than 7 years. In the past 7 years, Ethiopian government has been very committed in order to develop industrial parks and also attract more foreign direct investment and local investors as well. And in this government's commitment, we could attract more investment to industrial parks. Still, there are a lot of challenges regarding the operational and also increasing more job opportunities and transferring of knowledge to local investment. When I come to the agenda of innovation and technology and commercialization of researches, from the total industrial parks, we have some specialization. We have a technology park, parks that specializing on technology. Particularly, we understand that global economy is tending to be led by knowledge, or is going to be a knowledge-based economy. So the role of technology, the role of knowledge and research plays a very important role. So this technology park located in the capital and majorly attracting more investors that those are specializing on ICT or ICT enabling sector or technology. So still we do have challenges that commercializing researches that come out from universities or from industrial parks that we have. Majorly, the one that I mentioned here is a major challenge is a very weak linkage between universities and industries are observed in the past very few experiences. So maybe this can also observe it in many countries of African and also other continents. So as long as the linkage between university and industry is very weak, bringing what we are thinking or applying or bringing to the ground all what we are thinking cannot be achieved easily, because the knowledge is there with universities, and here practically the industrialists are applying. So including innovation also can be happen everywhere, particularly when it comes to industry parks. It always happens, but intellectual property management system that we have as a country is very weak also. So these all challenges may affect in commercializing the researches or innovations and technology that we have in the country. So the government commitment in supporting and also easing challenges that companies or investors are facing, and also barriers that happening between universities and industry should be addressed in the policy and government's continued supporters. So we have also designated one industrial park that focuses on pharmaceutical, which is majorly now technology-based, and it should be supported by R&D. So we are expanding in that pharmaceutical industrial park so that every manufacturing that come out from that industrial park, particularly the pharmaceutical, should be supported and also should be based on research and development. So we are aggressively working on that. There are gaps still that need to be addressed by government, by systematized, and also by government policies. And the other one is regarding the energy. The major challenge that we've been facing in the past few years is issue of energy that that had been supplied to industrial parks. Ethiopia majorly uses renewable energy. I can say 100%, but now we are diversifying to wind and solar energies. There are potentials where investors also come and invest in this sector, so that we have a sustainable energy source for special economic zone, and also different composition of industrial park that we have. So diversifying and also increasing and having sustainable energy generation also help us to have a sustainable industrial development in our continent. So addressing all these challenges that we have observed in our country, maybe working with government and also with private sector and universities can easily address all these challenges observed in our country. And also this, I believe all this challenge is happening in most of countries. So this can be addressed with government commitment and policies. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. Another round of applause for the panelists. Thank you. Thank you. And this brings us to the end of close to the end of our day for the program for the day. So next, I'm going to call someone very amazing and wonderful who you must all have interacted with as you are preparing to come for the event. So I invite Farah Hanafi, the Executive Director of AEZO, to give us a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much. So, distinguished guests and participants, I would like to thank you on behalf of the organizers and partners of this flagship event. It is my pleasure to express gratitude to all those who made this event a reality. I encourage all participants, all special economic zones community, to continue the excellent cooperation with each other, as well as to take all necessary steps to put the recommendations issued during this meeting into action. Let us all go away from here with one mind that the best way to combat common challenges is to work together. Thank you so much for all participants. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for all speakers for your precious collaborations. So this is the end of the day. Let's catch up at 8 for the gala dinner. So the gala dinner is offered by the African Development Bank. So the pickup, it will be at 7:30, and the gala dinner, it will be here at the Abuja International Conference Center at 8. So thank you so much. De la part de, voilà, j'ai des remerciements de la part de nos organisateurs et nos partenaires. Merci à tout le monde pour votre présence. Merci pour votre précieuse collaboration. C'est la fin d'une journée très très importante. Nous devons continuer à collaborer ensemble, à travailler ensemble. Et on se dit à très bientôt. On se dit à 8h. Le transfert, il va commencer à 7h30 à partir de tous les hôtels que nous avons sélectionnés pour nos participants. Et le dîner sera offert par la Banque africaine de développement à 8h. Merci à tout le monde et très bonne soirée.